Welcome back everyone to another reaction video. People have been asking me about this one for a while now. The channel is called Christopher, which is a great name, I think, for a channel. Put a link in the description to the original video. Looks like he's worked really hard on this. I saw some comments about him saying that he spent like a year researching and putting this together. This is World War II every day with army sizes. So we're going to watch it. And listen, I can't verify the exact figures here and kind of fact check that stuff. We're just going to have to trust that his research is accurate, and obviously all these numbers are probably subject to opinion and based on the best available records that we have. So I think it'll be interesting just to get a glimpse at some of the army sizes involved, although army size doesn't tell the whole story, as we will see when France comes into the war. So let's go ahead and dive into this one. Okay, so it looks like there's narration kind of stuff going on at the bottom here. Germany declares war on Poland. So we see the right now what we've got is Russia and Germany, and then Poland in the middle. And secretly, Poland has been divvied up because of the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. That deal, part of which was public between Germany and Russia, a non-aggression pact, but then there was a secret component to that in which they agreed to divide up Poland. Question I get all the time from people about this is if Germany, if France and the UK come into the war against Germany because they invade Poland, because they're protecting Poland, why don't they also declare war on Russia, who also invades Poland? Because the pact that the British and the French had with Poland specifically dealt with Germany. It didn't say anything about what happens if somebody else invades them. So they weren't treaty bound to declare war on Russia because of an invasion of Poland. But you can see here, Germany starts out right off the bat with almost 2 million men in their army. And it's not just about the numbers. It's also about the makeup of that force, with your air power, with your armor, things of that nature, and then of course tactics. But very quickly Poland's number goes up, so they must have mobilized at that point, because Poland obviously was not prepared for this. So they double very quickly. But you see 80,000 encircled. I guess it's probably in is that Königsberg? And of course now you've got France and the UK in the war. This is just the 5th of September now. This is 5 days in.
This morning, the British ambassador in Berlin handed...
Very quickly, that Polish number goes down, and then, of course, you have 700,000 Russians coming from the other side. Imagine being Poland in that situation. You're having a hard enough time holding on against Germany, and then Russia comes in on the other side, and you're done.
The German government...
And that's it. That's 3.5 weeks in. You're down to just 130-some thousand. They're blocked out, and of course, yeah, this keeps them from escaping, kind of like what you'll see with Dunkirk later on. You know, a lot of the Polish troops, especially Polish fighters, Polish paratroopers, fighter pilots, and paratroopers, are going to live to fight another day, but in small numbers, and usually within the British Army and different things like that. So a lot more of them could have escaped.
From them by 11 o'clock.
Stalin begins demanding Finnish territory. Remember that a lot of Finland had once belonged to Russia, so they're just going after what they feel already belongs to them.
They were prepared at once to withdraw their troops from Poland.
And of course, you notice the entire time this is going on, nothing happened on the Western Front. You know, Poland is probably sitting there wondering while they were being invaded, you know, why isn't France coming? Why isn't the UK coming? Well, they're not ready. They do this kind of phony war for the better part of a year. Registration begins in the UK to conscript all able-bodied males between 18 and 23.
A state of war would exist between us. I have to tell you now.
Hitler escapes a bomb blast in a Munich beer hall. Isn't that appropriate? Because back in the early 1920s, Hitler had been part of what was called the Beer Hall Putsch, which was a attempted military coup that starts in Munich.
That no such undertaking has been received, and that consequently this country is at war with Germany.
So right off the bat, you don't see a large number of Soviet troops on the border with Finland. They're kind of underestimating what they're going to need there. It's about a 3-to-1 advantage right now. Now you see the numbers climbing on both sides. And isn't that interesting there? USSR is expelled from the League of Nations. People forget the League of Nations even existed at this point. That was formed. It was kind of the child of the brainchild of Woodrow Wilson. Ironically, then the United States does not join the League of Nations because the U.S. Senate doesn't approve it. So even though Wilson wanted that to happen, the U.S. isn't a part of it. But there is a League of Nations. It's kind of a precursor to the United Nations. And they're getting beat by the Finns at this point. They're expelled from the League of Nations in response to the Soviet invasion of Finland. Kind of interesting, there's been at least a little bit of talk of, nothing will come of it probably, of expelling Russia from the UN Security Council, that 5-nation Security Council, permanent members of the Security Council. There's 5. I think there's 10 or 15 total. But there are 5 permanent members. That's China, Russia, France, the UK, and the United States. And they have veto power over most resolutions. And there have been talk of expelling Russia, but it won't happen. Goebbels, it gives a radio address, says that next year will be a hard year and we must be ready for it. And he's thinking ahead to the invasion of France in 1940. So, captured documents reveal Hitler's plan. The only thing I would say, if I would offer any constructive criticism of this video, is that maybe I get that 13 minutes, he's trying to keep it to a decent amount of time, and making it longer might make it drag out a little more, but it's hard to follow everything that's going on the bottom because it's going by so fast. Maybe if he slowed down the time a little bit, or maybe made it into 2 parts or something. So Germany makes final plans for the invasions of Denmark and Norway. So they're going to be going straight up this way here. Soviets now have almost 700,000 men on the border. Finns still have about the same, but they're hanging on. You see the borders haven't changed much there. Now the numbers are starting to go down for the Finns, and we start to see things creeping a little bit. And the Finns are running out of men, and then you see that's it. They dropped from 170,000 to about 120,000. They've lost about a third of their available manpower. And even though they've held the ground, the Soviets haven't made much advances as far as the ground, at least what you can see here. They realize, all right, you know, we're gonna collapse pretty quickly, so they drop out. We're about to see the invasion of France now. There's Denmark. Here comes the invasion of Norway. And that happens pretty fast. Even though the numbers, there's a great example of where the numbers don't tell the whole tale. Because look right now, you've got 25,000 Germans, 60,000 Norwegians. The number's not going to go up significantly in the Germans' favor before they move. Like right now, you're still pretty even, but they're starting to move on territory. That's where you see tactics and weaponry and all of those things playing a factor. Germany invades France and the Benelux as Belgium, Netherlands, Luxembourg. But there, look at the numbers. Numbers on the Allied side pretty much identical to what the Germans have. And yet, we know what happens. This is, listen, my friends in France. I love you, France. You have an amazing country. Can't wait to come back. What you did in World War I is incredible. Lost a huge chunk of your population, held the ground, fought admirably. But listen, there's no way around this. You had an army that was the same size as the Germans, and you collapsed like a house of cards in World War II. That's just the reality. You got out outmaneuvered on the battlefield, big time. I mean, look at this. The numbers are identical there. Incidentally, Churchill becomes prime minister like the day that the invasion of France happens. Like, imagine coming into power in the UK right as the invasion of France happens. And then, of course, he leaves as prime minister right when the war in Europe is over.
Fight in France.
And just like that, you see the number go way, way down. Like right here, you see the numbers are still even on May 15th. They're still even on the 18th. And then boom, just like that on the 21st, they lose 1 million men. I guess that's the guys that got encircled. That's the only thing I can figure. That's where you've got maneuverability. That's where you've got blitzkrieg. That's where getting behind them and surrounding your enemy makes all the difference. And suddenly now, instead of facing even odds, you got 1 million man advantage on the front lines.
We shall fight on the seas and oceans. We shall fight with growing confidence and growing strength in the air.
And at this point, it's over. The Italians finally enter. France is down to half the strength that they had when this started on the front lines. And remember, these weren't all French forces. There were the UK as well.
To defend our island, whatever the cost may be.
And it's over.
We shall fight on the beaches.
Month and a half.
We shall fight on the landing grounds. We shall fight in the fields.
So now you can't really quantify in numbers showing the Battle of Britain, but obviously now the air war begins between mainland Europe and the UK. And you can see the UK is left alone among the Allies, standing in the West. You've got the Soviet Union, who are not yet in the war. It's going to be another year before they're at war with Germany. And so for a year, it's just the UK. And, you know, you've got French troops there, and you've got Polish troops there, and other countries there in small numbers. But it's basically just the UK at this point.
And in the streets, we shall fight in the hills. We shall never surrender.
It says Hitler, you know, Hitler sets the date of September 15th for the invasion of Britain, but there was never really going to be a serious opportunity to do that. Naval supremacy just wasn't there. The British still have a powerful navy. Even with the air power that the Germans have, they're not invading Britain. It's just not happening.
We shall never surrender. And if, which I do not for a moment believe, this island or a large part of it were subjugated and starving.
I love that quote. Never was so much owed by so many to so few. The Battle of Britain can't be overstated how important that was, because had the Germans been able to destroy the British, the RAF, the British Air Force, and they were able to get air supremacy, maybe they can try to neutralize some of the British Navy and have a chance to get, or at least maybe drop paratroopers over. I don't know. The only chance they had was complete air supremacy, and it just didn't happen. Even then, I still wonder if it was even possible.
In our empire, beyond the seas, armed and guarded by the British fleet, would carry on the struggle until, in God's good time, the new world, with all its power and might, stepped.
So the informal Axis is formed now in October of 1940, and now you've got the Axis powers fighting against the British in Africa, and that's going to be kind of the battleground for the Western Allies for the next couple of years until 1943. That's really where all the fighting is going to be for the Western Allies, while the Soviets are fighting on the Eastern Front.
Forth to the rescue and the liberation of the old.
Mussolini invades Greece, and Hitler's mad about this. Why? Because these are troops. Hitler knows at some point he's planning on invading the Soviet Union, and he's probably going to want Italian help with that. We don't need to be going on little side quests to go after people like Greece. We got to deal with the big boys. And look at the Greeks go. So now you get Hungary and Romania joining the Axis. And that just kind of leaves Yugoslavia, Bulgaria as kind of the lone neutral powers in this part of the world. Look at the Greeks, man. They hardcore. Love it. Planning Barbarossa. Outnumbered 2-1, the Greeks are. Lend-Lease introduced by U.S. Congress. As much as people always talk about the United States being neutral for the early parts of both world wars, the U.S. in terms of trade policy was anything but neutral. Not active militarily, but supplying one side. And Lend-Lease becomes a huge part of this. Supplying material and weapons and supplies of various kinds, not only to the UK, but also to the Russians. USSR offer to join the Axis. Hitler does not respond. Man, imagine how the world would be different if that were to happen. Look at those numbers in Greece.
Never in the field of human conflict was so much owed by so many to so few. All our hearts go out to the fighter pilots, whose brilliant actions we see with our own eyes day after day.
And now, just as you see a pretty significant advantage on the front in Greece, the UK starts putting troops into Greece, and now you see their numbers go way up. You think it was bad before for the Italians.
I hope, indeed I pray, that we shall not be found
There's
unworthy
Yugoslavia
of our
joining.
victory, if after toil.
And then immediately fascist government gets removed. The quickest gray back to neutral color that you'll ever see. That was crazy. Like right there. Oh, I guess we're skipping ahead a little bit.
All our hearts go out to the fighter pilots.
Bulgaria joins the Axis. Yugoslavia joins and then is out.
Day after day. I hope, indeed I pray, that we shall not be found unworthy of our victory, if after toil and tribulation it is granted to us.
So then immediately Hitler invades Yugoslavia. There's 500,000 men there that initially they thought they were going to have on their side. So now they've got to deal with that.
For the rest,
and now because so many more troops have been sent into the Balkans, now you're starting to see the pushback in Greece.
we have to gain the victory. That is our task.
So here you have kind of the high water mark of the Third Reich, right? I mean, this is the extent to which they're going to have their most territory before they make the fateful decision to invade Russia, the Soviet Union. Yeah, I shouldn't say Russia because obviously you have Ukraine and Belarus and others in here too. But, I mean, they're going to gain more territory, but it's all downhill once the invasion of the Soviet Union begins. This is kind of the point at which you could sit back and say, okay, stop. Don't do any more. But usually ruthless dictators who are hungry for more land, more power, more invasions don't know when to stop, or they never would have gotten to that place in the first place. So now the buildup is beginning for Operation Barbarossa. The Bismarck is sunk in the North Atlantic by the Royal Navy, so that's all going on. The naval war is going on, which is something we can't quantify on this map. Iraq is out. Now the numbers start climbing in Africa, while the buildup is continuing on the Eastern Front. We're about to see the invasion of the Soviet Union. There it is. So right off the bat, Germans have a big advantage. And if you're thinking about, well, when this happened with France, you know, it worked out well. And you can see where they're kind of making their big breakthroughs. They're pushing through with the idea of trying to get around, surround, and take out large numbers of Soviet troops. That's got to be the strategy, right? Because you can't go toe-to-toe, blunt force against the Soviets, because they've got huge numbers in terms of manpower, so you've got to isolate and destroy hundreds of thousands of men in chunks. And they do that several times. I mean, that's what you're trying to do here with your blitzkrieg. Now, Finland, you have an invasion happening up there. So you got 300,000 encircled. This is the plan. That's why you see things happening the way that they are. Minsk falls. Now, right here, it's looking bad for the Soviets. You've got 4 million men between Finland and then the main Eastern Front. You've got almost a 2-to-1 advantage for the Axis powers. Right now, a couple of weeks in, it's looking really good for the Germans. Now the Soviet numbers start to climb, then they go down again. But as mobilization happens, as a massive power with huge amounts of manpower is able to start rushing those people to the front lines, you're going to lose that advantage. Field Marshal Halder says the war against Russia has already been won. This is a month in. 310,000 more encircled. During the course of the war, something like 6 million Soviet troops are going to be prisoners of war. And a good bit more than half of them will die in captivity. You're going to see a video from my visit to the Soviet cemetery in the Netherlands where I talk a little bit about that. But now the manpower advantage has already peaked. And here's where Hitler, against the advice of his generals, shifts some of the forces from the Moscow offensive, starts shifting them to the south. And see, that's what I'm talking about. Like, he's got more than one thing over top of another. Like, I don't know. Slow it down. Even if you just slowed it down in certain parts where there's more happening. But now you've got 4 million against 3 million. You've already lost half of the numerical advantage that you had. There's the siege of Leningrad. Things are still pretty static down in Africa. That front hasn't changed a whole lot for a year or more down there between Egypt and Libya. Soviets are continuing to fall back. This is where the Germans are going to get super close to Moscow. They're still encircling Leningrad. They're starting to push their way down towards Stalingrad. And the Soviets are down to just 2 million men at this point. Again, you've got the 4-to-2 advantage in terms of millions. But look at those German numbers going down. Temperatures, see that? November. Watch how quickly, let's back up. 31st of October, 800,000 man advantage for the Germans. Joseph Stalin states that 4.5 million Germans had already died in Russia. A great exaggeration. Do you think they don't even have that many men on the front in Russia? But that 800,000 man advantage here, of course you have that 450 up here, but just looking at this number, 800,000 man advantage, watch from the beginning of November how quickly that changes. 2 weeks later, they're dead even. In fact, the Russians have more. Just in the span of 2 weeks, you go from almost a 1 million man advantage down to even numbers, and that's as good as it's going to get. It at this point in the war, it is all downhill for the Germans. All downhill. They're still moving forward, but now you got 4.2 million Soviets, and you've got 2.9 million Germans. It's done. It's done at this point.
Yesterday,
and now the Americans have entered the war.
7th,
and now you're starting to see down here that the Axis is starting to fall back. Hitler takes supreme control of German military matters. He figures they blew it. I'm going to do it.
1941, a date which will live in infamy. The United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan.
Now at this point, where the Germans once had a 2-to-1 advantage on the Eastern Front, now they're the ones that are significantly outnumbered, almost to a 2-to-1 advantage. Both sides pouring more people into the fight. Now you've got over 5 million Soviets on the line. You got to remember, there's been probably 1 million or more casualties at this point. So those numbers continue to climb, even though there's staggering losses happening at the same time. Hitler demands Mussolini send more men to the Eastern Front. Dude, there aren't enough men in Italy to make a difference at this point. Mussolini complies, sending 7 additional divisions, as well as the 2 already promised, completely worthless. 7 divisions are going to make no difference on that front. None at all. This was a key moment right here. Britain and USSR agree that no separate peace will be signed with Germany. The UK and the French had already come up with a similar agreement, and that's important that everybody's on the same page, that they all agree at least on that, even if there's going to be differences of opinion, that if you can at least agree that we're all going to be in this until they surrender to all of us at the same time. There's no separate secret deals that we're going to make. There's no, okay, we'll make a deal. Because that's what happened in World War I. Russia drops out of the war and really sticks it to the Western Allies. Thankfully, they were able to hold on until the Americans can start getting troops into the fight. Numbers are still... People are they're just throwing more and more men into that meat grinder of the Eastern Front. We're about to see the Americans show up for the first time in the European and African theaters. Operation Torch. German summer offensive begins. You can see, even though they've got a big disadvantage now in numbers, they're still pushing forward. There's El Alamein. Not a step back. This is Stalingrad. This is his city that bears his name. And this is where the German army is going to really... I mean, they've already suffered greatly. And look at the numbers. You can see how difficult the odds are. And now they're going to have the disaster in Stalingrad. See, I can't read anything down there. Gonna see the Americans showing up on the western part of Africa here now. There they are. And in the form of George S. Patton. The first troops that he fights against are Vichy French. They're not Germans, they're not Italians, they're the French. But now the Americans are going to get their first taste of combat. It's not going to go particularly well until Patton gets in there and kind of rights the ship, so to speak. And then they're going to be able to clear, between the British and the Americans, are going to be able to clear out Africa and then prepare for the invasion of Sicily, which, you know, people always forget that Normandy wasn't the first invasion into Europe for the British and the Americans. It was Sicily and then Italy. And it was only after that that then Normandy happens, and then there's another landing down here in southern France. And at this point, the Russians have a 2-to-1 advantage on the Eastern Front. So now you've got 330,000 German troops encircled around Stalingrad. And as you get into 1943, I think by this point, everyone, at least on the Allied side, understands that this is going to be a win. It's just going to be a matter of how long, how many lives does it take, and what's the post-war world going to look like. And you've seen that, all along the Germans and the Italians have only had roughly 100,000 men in Africa. But you see how when the Americans land, both sides start really ramping up those numbers. Look how quickly it goes. December 24th, 1942, there are 125 there, 170,000 Germans. Even if I just go back here, there's 100,000 Germans at the end of November. 2 weeks later, there's 140,000. 2 weeks after that, you're up to 170,000. And 2 weeks after that, now you're up to over 200,000. And you continue to see it climb. But the Allies are ramping up their numbers too. And even now, as they're losing ground, losing ground, more and more men are showing up. It's like, the idea, we talk about it all the time, the sunk cost fallacy. It's like, this is a losing proposition, but we're going to keep pouring things into it because we've already spent so many lives and so much time here. We can't fail now. It's done. They're up to 300,000 men at this point, but they've lost almost all their territory in Africa. Still going up. So they peak at almost 350,000 men. Meanwhile, things are collapsing on the Eastern Front. And now you're going to have the Battle of Kursk. And that's going to be kind of when things start to fall apart on the Eastern Front for the Germans and the line starts pushing back toward Germany. So now the Axis is pulling out of Africa. And so immediately, Allies are not sitting on their laurels, resting on their laurels. They've captured 250,000 Germans, already thinking about the invasion of Sicily. And then the invasion of Sicily happens, and then immediately go into Italy, and that's when the Italians are out of the war. Manpower continues to pour into the Eastern Front this entire time that's going on. Here comes Sicily. All right, so now you've got 6.7 million Soviets on the Eastern Front. They've got a 2-to-1 advantage. Now you're going to start to see the Allies, for the first time, coming into mainland of Europe with the invasion of Sicily and then Italy itself. And of course, that coincides with Kursk and Operation Citadel on the Eastern Front. So it's bad timing for the Germans because they can't be in two places at once. They don't have the men to cover both. Axis is out of Sicily. There's 500,000 men in Sicily at this point. This is the point at which, even though we've already said it's done, this is the point at which I think if you're German, you start to see that it's done. We've lost Africa. We've lost Sicily. We're about to lose the southern half of Italy. The Russians are advancing on the Eastern Front. It's done. So the minute the Allies land in mainland Italy's like, we're out, we're done. And so now the Germans have to rush forces down into Italy to pick up for the lack of the Italian forces. And this is slow going up the Italian peninsula. They get about halfway and then they hit Monte Cassino and places like that. It's brutal. So you can see Allies have 100,000 man advantage, but they're not going to make a lot of gains here for the next couple of months. And now for the first time we see numbers going down on the Eastern Front on both sides. Because the Germans are pulling what they can over to Italy, but they don't have a lot left at this point. They're starting to scrape the bottom of the barrel. Still going up the numbers for the Germans in Italy. Now you're starting to push toward a 3-to-1 advantage for the Russians on the Eastern Front. We'll be getting there pretty soon. And as I said, you can see it's been several months and the front line has not moved in Italy. It's been pretty static. And now at this point, we're, 2 months away from D-Day, from the Normandy Invasion. So that's being planned. And it was thought for a while it could happen in May. So, you know, the Germans are hanging on here in Italy. They've held that line for quite a while now. Things are collapsing on the east. They just really don't have the manpower for a third front to have to deal with, and then a fourth down here in southern France. Numbers are still going up in Italy, though.
Soldiers, sailors, and airmen of the Allied Expeditionary Force.
So this is this is Eisenhower speaking now. This is him probably reading sometime later for a recording the message that he gave to the invasion force before they attacked Normandy.
You are about to embark upon the great crusade toward which we have striven these many months. The eyes of the world.
So if Allies finally win Monte Cassino, and now things are going to happen. And again, bad timing for the Germans, right? The moment that things finally break in Italy also happens to be June 6, 1944. Happens right around that same time when the landings in Normandy happened.
The hopes and prayers of
and right there, by the 15th, is when you have the balance of power shift. That's when, for the first time, there are more Allies in Normandy than Germans.
Liberty-loving people everywhere march with you. In company with our brave allies and brothers in arms on other fronts.
And now you see that right at that moment where things collapse in Italy and on the Western Front, now you start to see a further collapse on the East. You see the effect of that on the East.
In company with our brave allies and brothers in arms on other fronts, you will bring about the destruction of the German war machine, the elimination of Nazi tyranny over the oppressed peoples of Europe, and security for ourselves in a free world.
So now you've got 2-to-1 advantages at least in all three places. You've got almost a 3-to-1 advantage in Normandy. And again, look, this is 2 months in to Operation Overlord. This is 2 months since D-Day. Not a lot of territory has been gained so far. It's been a pretty slow push. The terrain has a lot to do with that, but there are other factors as well. Italy's pretty much conquered at this point, except for northern Italy. You're getting super close where the Russians have made it about halfway across Poland now. They're going to start to get to actual German territory here pretty soon. And now here comes the breakout. So watch how quickly This is 2 months in. You've got very little happening.
World.
And then, boom, they make the breakout. And within a couple of weeks, Paris falls. And now you've got the landing in southern France. So now you've got 3-1 here. You've got almost 2-1 here. You've got 3-1 over here. Germany's done. Now, at this point, September 1944, a rational person would look at this situation and say, call it off. End the bloodshed. You know, to quote Abraham Lincoln's character in the movie Lincoln, shall we stop this bleeding? But of course, that's not how it's going to go down. And we're going to see hundreds and hundreds of thousands more casualties. You've got Operation Market Garden failing in the Netherlands. You've got the Siegfried Line, which is where Germany has built kind of their last strong line of defense right along the border. That was a line that was built called the West Wall by the Germans all the way back in 38, 39. But now they're taking advantage and using it. Greece is starting to fall. Now we're going to get the Battle of the Bulge. You're going to see that right around here. Hitler's last counteroffensive into the Ardennes forest. Bastogne is going to be right there in the middle. And there, for the first time, you have Soviet troops crossing into the border of what was then Germany. Now, granted, all of this is part of Poland today. Some of this is Ukraine, but at the time it was still part of Germany. At this point, Hitler's in the Führer bunker. This is January, so he's going to spend the last couple of months there. And you see by February, the Soviets are already on the outskirts of Berlin. They're super close at this point. And the Allies are still not really even in Germany. You're going to have Operation Varsity, which is going to be this big airborne drop on the German side of the Rhine. You're going to have the crossing of the Rhine. But by this point, the Soviets are already knocking on the door of Berlin. And you see the numbers have gone up significantly. The Germans, for the first time, have almost 1 million men on the Western Front. That's because they're scraping the bottom of the barrel. They're putting kids and old men on the line at this point. And now the Americans and the Brits and the French and the other Western allies are into Germany. And you can see how, even though the Soviets had been really close to Berlin, look how they're pretty static in the fighting there. But now the Western allies make this major advance toward Berlin. Get almost as close as the Soviets do. But then they let them have it. And that's it. All right, that was really cool. And man, he must have done a ton of work in that. So even though I offered some constructive criticism, hey, I didn't make it. I didn't spend all the time and energy that he put into that. So I'm really not in much of a position to criticize. Just to say, Christopher, thank you for all the work you put into that. A very unique way of looking at the war in Europe and in Africa. Let me know what you guys think. I'm sure a lot of you have already seen it. Use the comment section below. If you have requests for other things you'd like to see me do a reaction to, let me know. Thank you to all of our patrons. We'll see you again soon.